The Kalrix cubs were a problem that even Instructor Korvac couldn't solve. 3 of them had arrived at the Galactic Defense Academy 2 cycles ago, rescued from a demolished research station near the Outer Rim. Orphaned, traumatized, and utterly feral, they'd been placed in temporary holding while the Council decided their fate. The Kalrix were apex predators from a death world, quadrupedal hunters with obsidian claws, rows of serrated teeth, and eyes that glowed amber in the dark. Full-grown, they stood taller than most species and could tear through reinforced steel. These cubs were barely a meter tall, but they'd already hospitalized 4 handlers. Korvac stood outside the reinforced containment unit, his 4 arms crossed over his chitinous chest. Inside, the cubs circled their enclosure like small storms, hissing and snapping at the walls. Every attempt to approach them had ended in violence. Sedation was dangerous. Their metabolism made dosing unpredictable. Force fields only made them more aggressive. "We should transfer them to a wildlife preserve," muttered Ensign Talvik, a Rendorian whose scales had turned pale gray with stress. "This isn't a zoo." Korvac's mandibles clicked in frustration. "The Council wants them socialized. They're sentient, Talvik, not animals. They're predators who don't understand language. Then we find someone who speaks without words." That's when Cadet Mira Solon walked by. She was human, a species that had only joined the galactic community 15 standard years ago. Young, barely into her 2nd decade, with the kind of fresh-faced optimism that usually got beaten out of cadets by the 3rd week. She paused at the observation window, her brown eyes widening as she watched the cubs. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Korvac turned one of his eye stalks toward her. "They're dangerous, Cadet. Keep moving." But Mira didn't move. She pressed closer to the glass, watching the largest cub, a female with a scar across her muzzle, pace frantically. "She's scared. She's aggressive." "Because she's scared," Mira repeated. She glanced at Korvac. "Sir, may I try something?" Every instinct in Korvac's military-trained mind screamed no. Humans were durable, yes. Their death world origin made them surprisingly resilient, but they were still soft-bodied, small, and this particular human looked like she could barely handle a training rifle. Yet there was something in her voice, a certainty. "You'll be monitored," he said finally. "One wrong move and we pull you out." Mira nodded and stepped into the airlock. The moment the inner door opened, all 3 cubs froze. Their glowing eyes locked onto her. The smallest one, a male with gray-tipped fur, bared his teeth and released a low rumbling growl that rattled the walls. The largest female dropped into a crouch, muscles coiling beneath her midnight black coat. Mira didn't flinch. She sat down. Just sat. Cross-legged on the floor, a few meters from the cubs, hands resting loosely on her knees. She didn't stare at them directly. Didn't reach out. Didn't speak. She simply existed in their space, calm and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the universe. Outside, Talvik's claws scraped against the control panel. "This is insane. She's going to die." Korvac said nothing. He watched. Minutes passed. The cubs didn't attack. The female's ears twitched, swiveling toward Mira. The gray-tipped male took a tentative step closer, then another. The 3rd cub, the runt with mismatched eyes, whimpered softly and pressed against the wall. Then Mira did something extraordinary. She smiled. Not a threatening display of teeth, not a predator's grin. Just a soft, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. And she began to hum, a low rhythmic sound that seemed to fill the space without overwhelming it. A lullaby, Korvac realized. Something humans sang to their young. The gray-tipped cub sat down. Then the female. Then, slowly, the runt crept forward. It approached Mira with trembling steps, sniffing the air. When it was close enough, Mira extended her hand, not over the cub's head but low to the side, palm down. An invitation, not a demand. The runt sniffed her fingers. Then, with a tiny chirp, It pressed its head against her palm. Mira's smile widened. She stroked the cub's head gently, scratching behind its ears the way one might pet a domesticated creature. The runt's eyes closed. Its body relaxed. Within moments, it curled up against her leg. The other two cubs watched. Then, as if some invisible barrier had shattered, they approached as well. The female butted her head against Mira's shoulder. The gray-tipped male flopped onto his back, exposing his belly in a universal gesture of trust. Korovak's translator crackled with Talvik's disbelief. What? What is she doing? Being human, Korovak said quietly. An hour later, Mira emerged from the containment unit. The cubs were asleep in a pile, their breathing slow and even. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. They needed someone who wasn't afraid, she explained. Fear smells like threat. Aggression looks like challenge, but calm. Calm is safe. Korovak studied her with newfound respect. Humans, he'd learned in briefings, were persistence hunters from a world where they'd climbed to the top of the food chain not through strength or speed, but through patience and empathy. They'd domesticated wolves into companions. They'd formed bonds with creatures that should have been their enemies. You'll be assigned to their care, he said, permanently. Mira's smile returned. That same gentle expression that had tamed 3 apex predators without a single word of command. I'd like that, sir. As she walked away, Talvik turned to Korovak. How did she do it? Korovak watched the sleeping cubs through the observation window. Humans are predators too, he said. But they're the kind of predators who understand that the strongest weapon isn't always claws or teeth. Sometimes it's compassion. The cubs slept peacefully for the first time since their rescue, and Cadet Mira Solin had just proven something the galaxy was still learning. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their endurance or their stubbornness. It was their ability to see the frightened child in every predator's eyes and offer a smile instead of fear.